Lawyers of the internet, have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose, and why? On to story number 1. Social Security disability attorney here. I've had this feeling more than once. Number 1, representing a guy who was a registered offender. He was in his 50s when convicted. The victim was under 14. He was denied disability. He was always nice and courteous, but I just despised every second in his presence. Number 2, clients who lie to me, or to the judge, particularly about drug use. I've got your medical records. I can see all your blood tests and urine tests. I can see what you've admitted to your doctor. If you're not going to tell the truth to your own lawyer, how am I supposed to help you? P.S. 99% of the people I represent probably deserve disability. We are all one medical problem away from never working again, never enjoying life again. Be kind to one another and don't take your health for granted. Edit to add, if you have had the chance to add long-term disability coverage through an employer or through an outside company, do it. Social Security is freaking ridiculous sometimes. I've had plenty of deserving clients wait over 3 years for a hearing just to get screwed over by having a hearing with a judge that has a 10% approval rating. For those who want to read more about this, just Google disabled workers in SC roll the dice when drawing judges. I have schizophrenia and moderate to severe pain alongside my spine due to scoliosis and 2 nasty car accidents. I also have a mild traumatic brain injury from the second car accident, T-boned at 55 miles per hour, youch. I have arthritis and 3 herniated discs as well. I've been denied Social Security 6 times now. I'm on state disability, but it hardly pays anything. They say I'm too educated. I have a BA from a good school and could do an office job. I can't sit or stand for too long. I throw up regularly from pain. Reading or too much internet gives me headaches, and I throw up. I'm unable to do that 8 hours a day. Not to mention I have hallucinations and paranoia regularly from schizophrenia. I can hardly take care of myself. I've lost 50 pounds because I have trouble eating. Social Security is a joke. They deny most people, even if they clearly need it. This process has been so stressful. I'm so sick of it. It's definitely not for the faint-hearted. I'm very sorry you're going through all that, and unfortunately your situation is not unique. Many people give up prior to ever having a hearing, and you have to appeal twice to get to that level: initial, then reconsideration, and then hearing. Have you ever had a hearing? I would highly encourage consulting an attorney if you haven't already done so. Edit, also depending on your work history and when you stopped working, you may only qualify for SSI. SSDI, the one that typically pays more, has a kind of expiration date called a date last insured. You have to show disability before that date to get those benefits. SSDI is based on your work history. As you work, you earn credits when you pay into the system. When you stop working, you stop getting credits, so your date last insured stops getting pushed further into the future. Can confirm, SSD sucks. We just lost our district court suit against the commissioner for my husband's denial. Our judge from the 2017 hearing had a 25% approval rating. The next lowest in our district was 67%, and the average for all of them in our district was around 70 to 75%. His DLI expired 2 weeks before his hearing in 2017, originally filed in 2014 or 2015, I can't remember at this point. We've emotionally given up, but our lawyer wants to bring it to the New York State Supreme Court. We're just going along at this point because there's nothing else to lose and we can't reapply. Husband has diagnosed OCD, generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, and spinal problems with nerve root compression. He recently finished a 3-month bout of daily outpatient treatment, but apparently some ALJ thinks he's capable of working, and employers are cool with that, much absenteeism. Shoot, that's just a poopy draw. Poopy. Story 2. I'm a law student, but the place I worked at last summer was a civil litigation firm with one partner who did mostly criminal defense. None of the associate attorneys liked getting assignments from that partner, since none of them had really signed on to do criminal defense work. Anyways, one associate ended up having to write an appeal for a guy who was convicted of R-ing and red-rumming his young child. There was a serious constitutional violation that the appeal was based on, but realistically the entire office was hoping the appeal would be denied, including the associate who got stuck writing it. Edit. Don't know what happened, not gonna say where it was. The associate tried his best, no one got disbarred. Yes, it sucked to work on it knowing the guy was guilty. Edit 2. Everyone deserves constitutional rights. What is wrong with you people? The problem was that the associate and I had signed on to do civil work, not criminal. It's insanely morally difficult to defend someone who did something inexcusable, even though you logically know that the Constitution and our system of law wouldn't work if no one was willing to defend the guilty. I have the highest respect for criminal defense attorneys. We knew he was guilty because of the serious constitutional violation involved. I truly believe the guy deserved another trial because of how egregious the violation was. We can't start cutting corners with our judicial system, and the system itself needs to be held accountable for its errors. I can't even imagine how hard that would be to do. I get that everyone needs their constitutional rights protected and fought for, but I can't even imagine the emotional fortitude it must take to defend someone you know is guilty of something horrible. Think of it this way. In the case that a defense lawyer does their job competently, with good faith, and diligently, the resulting guilty verdict is incontestable and legitimate to the highest degree because of all of the effort put towards trying to maintain that guilty person's innocence. In the case where the defense presents an excessively lazy or apathetic campaign, the final guilty verdict would either be a punishment in excess or one which is suspect for being illegitimate, since there was no pushback. It's kind of a two to tango sort of delay where, whatever the final verdict, both parties have a hand in determining the outcome. The defense has the job of making sure the punishment... Oh yes, a high-maintenance divorce client that was pitching a fit because she was going to have to pay $60 a month in child support. She wanted a recalculation, and I was praying she would have to pay more. Oh, that's nothing, assuming there wasn't maintenance for the other spouse. My dad was paying about $700 a month to my mother for me when I wasn't even living with her, to our government. Without defense attorneys doing the really hard work, there's no legitimacy to our justice system, and the government falls apart. Note, I'm not really interested in a debate about the military, imperialism, or anything similar. I use the phrase in principle for a reason. Story 3. Defended a company that attracted a bunch of its employees with a profit-sharing incentive scheme. After 5 years, when the incentives were due to be paid, they tried to change the definition of profit in the employee contracts so they could argue that no incentives were payable. I was neither surprised nor unhappy when the judge told our clients they were full of poop. A manufacturing and fabrication shop I worked for did a similar thing, albeit on a much smaller scale. They implemented a bonus, and a few months into it, when we blew the goal out of the water, they told us that the way they were calculating the bonuses was flawed, so they had to change it. We ended up getting a fraction of what we should have, and it was in the form of a tool allowance that the company would manage and let us use to purchase our own tools, probably so they could claim those purchases on their taxes. There was never any contract, so there wasn't much we could do. I'm so glad I left that poop hole. Oh, I can understand. Oddly enough, hardly ever in healthcare are we offered incentives, but a company I worked for once offered a bonus if we were to present a money-saving plan and would receive a portion of the money if the plan was implemented. The physician that I was assigned to work for was exceedingly wasteful. I immediately drafted a plan in which costs could be cut, did all the calculations, and turned it into my supervisor, who was astonished and thrilled. Also made the presentation to the board, who were all in with implementation, and then I was overruled by a costly physician who had the final say-so. So, no bonus. So I quit a few months later. The physician later left under questionable circumstances, being a wasteful, lazy loser. And you've just described the perfect way to crush morale and make your entire workforce now slow down to the bare minimum pace or find a new job. Story 4. A serial killer red-rummed a local famous man in 2017. This victim owned a restaurant and was very popular in the city. He was a good human being. About 6 months after his red rum, a lady comes in claiming his house was hers. Backtrack about 20 years. The client and the victim bought a piece of property together. They're both on the title. They split up and she leaves a property that is literally falling apart. The property was close to being condemned. The victim hasn't had contact with my client in 15 years. He did all the work on the house and paid off the mortgage. The victim's kids are suing my client for half the house. If there is a God, they would get all of it. In short, a house she had nothing to do with that is worth $600K might be hers because a serial killer red-rummed the owner. She is a horrible person. I want to quit the firm over this case." But you're saying your client and the owner bought the property together? Kids should have the most part, but she should receive a part too. Legally speaking, if the victim had a will, his 50% would go to whoever was in the will. If he had no will, the 50% could easily go to the woman. I mean, that definitely sucks, but it sounds like legally the house is hers. She may not have put anything into it for the last 15 years, but she did buy it with the victim, and she is still an owner. It sounds callous, but the victim really should have gotten her off the title. Story 5. Obligatory not a lawyer, but a law student. My professors are both former prosecutors. They said that a lot of lawyers, particularly in the criminal world, have a lot of cases that they either don't care about or hope to lose. For example, if you're a public defender and you're defending some sort of R person, pedophile, etc., you really, really hope they lose, or at least don't walk. Public defenders absolutely have the poopiest job in law enforcement. You get assigned to defend a person who Rs, and sadly, many times an uninformed public will associate you with defending him and his behavior. A lot of guys being defended by a public defender are staring down the barrel of a lot of time, and their win is a favorable plea deal. So many PDs hope their clients do lose in the fact that they will still end up doing time. A PD is there, at least in the USA, to make sure a defendant's rights are protected and to make sure law enforcement follows proper procedures. On the prosecution side, there are sometimes pressures from the public, the victims, etc., to get a conviction on someone, especially in a particularly nasty case. My professor said that many times like this, or smaller cases where they're thinking, this really isn't a big deal, but outside pressures are forcing me to prosecute, and they hope that the guy can walk. So yes, some lawyers do want to lose. Unless they're getting paid on contingency, then they absolutely want to win. Story 6. On the regular. Honestly, if I wasn't rooting for my client to lose, corporate litigation mostly, never worked alone, by the time I was done working with them, I considered it a small victory. This was the main reason I'm what they call a recovering attorney now. Do and ask me anything. This kind of stuff is what the internet used to be about, not some promotional BS ask me anything. Well, I can't really breach client confidences, but reading corporate emails by the truckload often makes me remark how careless many office drones and even executives could be with company-issued email accounts. In the early, wilder days of the internet, many people didn't fully understand how fast things could travel. I got to read about infra-office extramarital affairs, complete with super cringe love poetry and all sorts of executive backstabbing. The executives at the European companies, not so much in the USA, seem to have a penchant for sending their favorite corn around, but none of that was really why I didn't like the clients. There was one company where the execs were big on canned game hunts, both in the USA and abroad, and another where they seemed to spend some crazy amount of money on lobbyists that make almost every problem the country faces worse, and so on. At this point, they're all kind of blending together. Oh, frick, I don't wish to be you. Thanks for the explanation, though. Story 7. Not quite, but I did a trial where I won, and the defendant came up after the guilty verdict and told me I did a great job, and he thought I was excellent in the trial. It was tough because sometimes you want the defendant to be mad at you to make it easier to send them to jail. This was honestly a guy who was taking responsibility for his actions. His mother was present, so it left me feeling weird. Would you rather he have shirked responsibility and insisted he was innocent? Sounds like this is the best outcome. He's taking responsibility for what he's done, and hopefully can move forward a better man. Although I do find it weird that if he is taking responsibility, why didn't he just go for a plea deal? He had a parole hold, so it was in his best interest to risk it at trial, because it was an 8-year-old case with a low chance of conviction. I think it's weird for me because whenever you take someone's liberty away, some small part of you feels bad. That's someone's son, nephew, grandchild, even in the ugly ones, so seeing him accepting it was weird with how many defendants I saw swearing me up and down. Story 8. My friend used to be a plaintiff's personal injury attorney, and he told me this story today about how he lost his client some money. The client was trying to use his kid to get money from a car accident, didn't just take the kid to the ER, he took the kid to a chiropractor, tried to act like the kid was really hurt. Pro tip, kids don't get the kinds of soft tissue injuries that adults and especially the elderly can get, so my friend does some extra negotiating and gets most of the settlement money paid to the kid. His client doesn't realize until after the papers were signed that most of his money was going to sit in the court's registry and go to his kid when he turns 18. He got angry, and my friend was like, "I thought that's what you wanted. I got a lot of money for your kid's injuries." We'll see the kid on r/legal advice in about 10 years. I'm 18 and my dad won a lawsuit when I was 9 and had money put in an account for my injuries when I came of age, and he's suing me to get it back. What are my options? Mods lock thread immediately. Y'all can't behave. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 9. Oh yes, a high-maintenance divorce client that was pitching a fit because she was going to have to pay $60 per month in child support. She wanted a recalculation, and I was praying she would have to pay more. That's nothing. Assuming there wasn't maintenance for the other spouse, my dad was paying $700 to my mother for me when I wasn't even living with her. Family law is tiring. Dude, 50-50 custody here. I make the same amount of money as my ex. I pay $758 per kid and 75% of daycare fees and 80% of extraordinary expenses. 3 years since the divorce. Tried to renegotiate 3 times. I'm paycheck to paycheck, paying $2,200 a month. My rent is $1,800 a month. My ex got to keep the house and vehicles. Her lover moved in with her and the kids as a tenant. The system is so broken, and I'm almost convinced my lawyer is screwing around with my ex, and together they're screwing me. There are situations where I understand why people choose to move around, change jobs often, and take money under the table to avoid paying child or spousal support. Story 10. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's usually because the client didn't take my advice. Maybe the client thought he could skip a certain step in a transaction to save money, usually, or time, same thing. In those cases, I'm rooting for it to come back and bite them in the tuchus. Sometimes it does. Sometimes there are no consequences. You win some, you lose some. Or if a client doesn't pay his bill, I secretly hope he gets in a situation where he suddenly appreciates my value. Or in other words, I hope he needs me again real soon so that he'll pay up, and I can ask for advance fees due to the past poor payment behavior. Speaking of, if I'm working a case where a client has unreasonable demands or expectations, and I just don't want to do it, but I have to because reasons, I just bill the heck out of them. Some folks pay for the privilege of being a jerk. Story 11. Not a lawyer, but I used to be a Lyft driver and drove a group of lawyers to a strip club once. One of them told me about a case he did earlier in the year. The guy was on trial for red rum and R. The dude was apparently crazy, and nobody doubted he was guilty. He was actually chained to a chair with a mask on, Hannibal Lecter style. His job was to try to get him off. He said he would try his hardest to get him to walk, but prayed to whatever God was listening that he would freaking lose. The guy got life with no chance of parole. He was relieved, but then switched to a different law firm. Story 12. I worked at a civil firm, and our biggest client for a while was a real estate investor who was the most unpleasant jerk I've ever met. His favorite scheme was buying distressed properties, translation, unlivable poop holes, at foreclosure sales, selling them on credit to people who couldn't afford to purchase a house any other way, waiting for the buyer to fix the place up with their own money, and then finding an excuse to foreclose on them so that he could buy the place back and sell it for more to somebody else. As you can imagine, this is wildly illegal and got him sued by many, many people. Trying to defend this indefensible jerkwad against the people he screwed was a nightmare, but I desperately needed the job. We dropped him as a client when he stopped paying his bills, and I hope he winds up behind bars or bankrupt. Edit: finding an excuse absolutely encompasses fabricating an excuse. Story 13. We dropped him as a client when he stopped paying his bills. Kel's surprise. My boss has been giving him a discounted rate for the volume of work he was bringing in for the firm. We stopped giving him the discount and he ghosted us. A volume discount for your fraud defense lawyer. Sigh. I laughed out loud when I read that. Yeah, the dude is definitely either behind bars or unalive by now. Like, you can stuff your law firm, but you know that guy reached for the stars and started stuff with his local and non-local mafia at some point. Story 14. I'm an intern at a public defender's office. You get these kinds of cases a lot. There are jerkwad clients who lie to their attorneys, disobey very clear and simple instructions, get mad and demand Nelson hearings or file frivolous complaints with the bar, Then there's clients who are nice enough, but are clearly guilty and a danger to everyone around them. Trigger-happy armed robbers, predators, etc. The PDs fight like heck for these clients, as they should, but they also sleep just fine when they're found guilty and get put away. There's a dude I'm doing work for currently who's looking at anywhere from 25 years to life without parole, and while I'm going to do my best to make sure his discovery is in order so he can get the fair trial he deserves, I fully expect him to rot, and am not terribly sad about it. Story 15. Family lawyer here. Associate, so I don't get to pick my clients yet. I had one where both parents sucked, heroin addicts. I had mom, but didn't want either parent to end up with custody. DFCS had been called, but had deemed it not severe enough to warrant removing the child. So I ended up calling another lawyer and strategizing with her to represent the grandparents so they could intervene for custody. It worked. The child is with grandma and doing much better. Parents are still addicts. Good on you for doing that, though. I applaud you and am glad you did that, but is that illegal or unethical? My client was okay with it, as it was her mom that intervened. She signed off on the strategy. Story 16. Public defender. Definitely yes. This guy touched his own children inappropriately. This post applies to several people I've defended. What are you supposed to do as a lawyer when the person you're defending is 100% guilty of such horrible things? Do you really need to defend them? It's kind of mind-boggling to me that someone would willingly defend them. Yes, you believe in the system. Your job is to ensure due process occurs. Fair trial. The likelihood of them being convicted is significant. Your job is to make sure they don't get railroaded into it and that others don't get railroaded into it. As another person said, make sure they go to jail legally. Story 17. Not me, but my mom had this case like 6 years ago, where she had to defend a man who ended the life of his ex-girlfriend's one-day-old baby. I remember my mom would come home every day and just cry. She's had a lot of cases where horrible things happen to kids, and she's always been so afraid something would happen to my brother or me. It really took a toll on her. Why did he end the life of a one-day-old baby? I have no words. Usually this kind of people can't give you a good answer for why. There's no valid reason on this earth to do such a thing. Story 18. All the freaking time. Family law is awful. Oh, preach. I've had clients swear up and down that they're clean, and when the evidence turns up that they use in their home with their kids around, I am happy to lose that motion to get the kid back. Don't freaking lie to me, and don't mess up your kid's life for your own selfish reasons. Story 19. I'm a divorce attorney. There are several people I've represented who aren't dangerous, but are pretty crappy parents. It's hard to help them fight for their kids without also fighting for them to be better parents. Fortunately, I live in a state where that kind of advice is allowed. Otherwise, I'd want many of my clients to lose. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.